Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Good evening. Welcome to The World Over Live. Thank you for being here. We've got a great show on tap for you. Dr. Jeni Stepanek joins us to talk about her late son, Matty. He was a poet, an author, and a tireless advocate for peace. All of that before the age of 14, incidentally, when he died of a rare form of muscular dystrophy. It's a story you won't want to miss, captured in her latest book, Messenger. It's a great read. And later, we'll talk about the latest news regarding the upcoming referendum for independence in Sudan with Dan Griffin of Catholic Relief Services and Bishop Daniel Adwok. We'd love to hear from you, so send us an email, worldover@EWTN.com. But let's begin. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. Archbishop Raymond Burke, the Vatican's top canonical jurist, has called on Catholic public officials who support abortion and homosexual marriage to repent publicly. He made the comment earlier this month at Human Life International's World Prayer Congress for Life in Rome. Of public officials, Archbishop Burke had this to say.
The person in question bears a heavy responsibility for the grave scandal which he has caused. The responsibility is especially heavy for political leaders. The repair of such scandal begins with the public acknowledgement of his own error and the public declaration of his adherence to the moral law.
In other news, Archbishop Burke was among 24 new cardinals named Wednesday by Pope Benedict. The consistory will take place on November 20th. Archbishop Donald Wuerl of Washington, D.C. was also named a cardinal. Here is his reaction to the announcement.
You recognize no one is ever worthy of this type of honor, but you're also grateful to God. You're grateful to God for the opportunity to serve in this capacity.
And back in the U.S., the Catholic bishops of New York are telling the state's Catholics that the right to life should be their first concern when voting in November. The pastoral letter, Our Cherished Right, Our Solemn Duty, notes, quote, the inalienable right to life of every innocent human person outweighs other concerns where Catholics may use prudential judgment, such as how best to meet the needs of the poor or to increase access to health care for all. They also cautioned Catholics when casting their votes so as not to be guided solely by party loyalty or by self-interest. Abortion has become a top issue in the state's gubernatorial race between Democrat Andrew Cuomo and Republican Carl Palladino. And according to LifeSite News, efforts by abortion groups to establish abortion as a universal human right in the UN Millennium Development Goals has failed. The report notes a memo from a top official at International Planned Parenthood who complains that the final document from the recently concluded UN summit, quote, neglects any reference to safe abortion, comprehensive sexuality education, indicating that there is still much work to be done, end quote. The world is watching with interest as Sudan decides whether the southern part of the country will secede from the north. Tensions and troop movements are on the rise after ambassadors from the UN Security Council failed to broker agreements between the North and South to demarcate the border, share oil revenue, and water rights. A 2005 peace agreement set up the referendum and ended a bloody 21-year civil war between Sudan's mostly Muslim north and the predominantly animist and Christian south. Nearly 2 million people died during the conflict. More about this later in the program. And the fruits of Pope Benedict XVI's recent visit to the United Kingdom are becoming evident. An Anglican congregation in Folkestone, England, has become the first in the country to accept the Pope's offer to join the Catholic Church as an ordinariate. This will allow the congregation to leave the Church of England while retaining many of their Anglican practices. And the chairman of a group representing traditionalist Catholic Anglicans, Bishop John Broadhurst of Fulham, recently announced his intention to join the Catholic Church. He is the fourth Anglican bishop to do so. EWTN will re-air major events from the Pope's trip to the UK on October 29th and 30th. For those of you who missed this historic event, it is a must-see, and the effects are only beginning to be seen and felt. And Israel's Antiquities Authority and Google announced Tuesday that the Dead Sea Scrolls will now be available online. This will allow scholars and the general public wide access to the ancient manuscripts. Discovered in the 1940s, users have free access to not only high-resolution images that are exact copies of the 900 manuscripts and 30,000 scroll fragments, but text files in their original languages as well as an English translation. The 2,000-year-old scrolls, which include parts of the Old Testament and treatises on communal living and apocalyptic war, have shed new light on Judaism during the time of Christ, before the spread of Christianity. And before we go to a break, here's tonight's Vaticano, focusing on the canonization of Mary Mackillop of Australia.
Determined and courageous, yet sweet and kind, with an unshakable faith in God. These are just some of the characteristics attributed to Mary Mackillop, the first Australian-born saint, who was beatified in 1995 by Pope John Paul II and canonized on October 17th by Benedict XVI.
For many years, countless young people throughout Australia have been blessed with teachers who were inspired by the courageous and saintly example of zeal, perseverance and prayer of Mother Mary Mackillop.
She was born in 1842 in Melbourne, where she dedicated herself to the children of poor religious families, trying to give them an education. Today, she's a point of reference for many young people who've come in contact with her special charisma.
She was not brash and she was not irresponsible, but she saw what needed to be done, and she worked with other people to bring about what it was that she needed to do and to make the changes that she could see. So I think for young people, she's an absolute wonderful model of what it is to have some goal in life and to pursue it and to do the things that are required and not to give up. She could have given up many, many times and moved away from it when difficulties arose, but she continued and continued and continued.
Mary Mackillop founded the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. It wasn't an easy task because there were difficulties both in society and in the church.
Most of the saints, and especially people who have founded new congregations, have had conflict with the more traditional, if you like, members of the church, with those who are in authority in the church. I believe that that comes about because the people like Mary have this wonderful vision of what it is that they need to do. They work a way that they think will bring that vision to a reality. They are usually people who are very close to God, and Mary was very, very conscious of what she believed was the will of God for her.
The fruits of the work of Mary Mackillop are plenty, and her message continues to live in the everyday lives of many ordinary people.
We have several thousand what we call associates, people who live her spirit. We have groups of young people who are banding together, giving time for 2 years, 1 year, several years, to do some of the type of work that Mary did. The work that she did grew out of her great love for God and her great love for people. These people still have that love, that spirit, and want to live it like Mary. So we have people now who work with migrants, with refugees, with the prisons, with those who need help.
Now, Now, should you find yourself in Washington, D.C. on some Thursday night, we expect to see you here. Drop us an email at worldoverdc@yahoo.com, and we'll reserve a place for you. Come see the sausage being made. When we return, Dr. Jeni Stepanek is here to talk about her son, Maddie, and her new book, Messenger. This is a message you won't want to miss. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
My first guest is here to talk about a very special young man, a prolific poet, a peace advocate, and philosopher who you will probably remember. He passed away just before his 14th birthday in 2004. He captured the hearts of media figures and the public alike. Millions have found hope and inspiration in the words and the life of Maddie Stepanek. Maddie suffered from a rare form of muscular dystrophy, as did his sister and two brothers. My first guest this evening is also battling the same disease. She is the author of Messenger, the legacy of Maddie J.T. Stepanek and Heart Songs. She's also Maddie's mom. Please welcome Dr. Jeni Stepanek. Jeni, thank you so much for being here. Such a pleasure to have you on. I have to tell you, I've looked forward to this for a long time and wanted to have you on for a good long time. The new book gives me an occasion to do so. I know it's out in paperback now. And let me start with why you decided to write a book titled Messenger. All of Maddie's writings have been out there, his poems, his heart songs, as he called them. Why did you feel called to write this book?
Well, I felt called to write Maddie's life story. Even before he died, I knew at some point his story would have to be told. And I knew when he died that I had to write the story because in my absence, nobody would know the story, and people would make up the details. So I felt the need to be the one to tell the story. Messenger was not the original title for the book. The original, I had several working titles that came from his poems, and the publisher suggested something different. And I prayed on it. I honestly prayed on it. And I thought of all the different things that stood for Maddie: play after every storm, on being a champion, you know, hope and peace. And I kept thinking, what summarizes the life story of somebody who believed his purpose for being, his heart song, and his reason for being created was to be a messenger of hope and peace. And I said, wait, messenger. And that's how it came to reflect that in the title. And then it just made it easier as I put all the chapters together. It really is about the message and who is the messenger behind the message. Because it's not about fame, it's about the little boy and where that message came from.
It's an extraordinary story and so moving. I mean, I wept, and I've been weeping for days reading this story. And I mean, tears of joy.
But you cried also. I mean, you laughed also.
I laughed. Right? I laughed a lot. And his spirit is there, and your spirit is captured in the book. I want to first start with, did you know he was an extraordinary little human being early on? I mean, was there any indication? I mean, you had been through a long, rough patch, losing children in 85, 87, 89, and then Maddie's born. He didn't know his siblings, did he?
Well, actually, I had 4 children in 4 years. I'm an Irish Catholic. Yeah, that's what we do. And I didn't know when I was having the children that I was going to have this disease or that I was passing it on to them. So I had 4 kids in 4 years. The first 2 did die before Maddie was born. What happened was the children were misdiagnosed. It's such a rare condition that they were misdiagnosed. And the misdiagnosis led doctors to a misprognosis of whether I'd have other children like this. Maddie did know his brother Jamie.
Oh, okay.
And that's where his poetry began, was with his interactions and his grief over the death of his beloved brother.
It was a way of him to sort of cope with the loss.
Yes.
It happened anyway. When Jamie died, and I didn't even understand the eternity of my sadness, I wished I could have prevented it. But then I remember it happened anyway. When I rest in my bed and dream about how I could have lived and played with my brother, I wish I could have stopped his death. But then I remember it happened anyway. When I look at pictures and imagine what he would be like now, a dozen years old, I wish I could have saved him from agelessness. But then I remember it happened anyway. When I hug our mommy and we think of why and how, and when he was with us and left us, we wish we could have prevented it and stopped his death and saved him from never needing breath for birthday candles. But then we remember that we don't understand. It happened anyway.
Did I know whether Maddie was, when did I know he was extraordinary? Every child's extraordinary. Every parent knows their child is extraordinary. I realized when Maddie was 3 and 4 years old, I knew he was very bright at a young age because he was reading before the age of 3, and I never taught him to read. He just knew things.
Wow.
He was very spiritual. He talked about God from a very young age, things that he wasn't learning in Sunday school. We're talking 3 and 4 years old. Wasn't watching on TV. I think when I first, it actually scared me. I think of when you read in the Bible and people are overcome with awe and fear. I was scared the first time my son said something about God speaking into his heart. And I thought he was attributing good thoughts to this being called God. But he said some things that I thought, this is not what 3 and 4-year-olds say. And I called a priest and said, should I be worried? And I even asked Maddie, when God speaks to you, do you hear a man's voice or a woman's voice? Is it high or low? Do I need a psychiatrist or, what is...
What's going on here?
And he was about 4 years old the first time I confronted him and said, you need to explain this to me because I don't get it. And he said, oh, Mommy, God doesn't talk to me like this. It's God's voice. It's in your heart. And that's why I was put on earth. He said, because I shape the message with my words and give it to the world so they understand it. But you don't hear God with a voice like, he's not human. And he said it to me as if...
So matter of fact.
It's like, you're the mommy, you should know these things. And that, not frightened as in, ooh, but, that sense of, what do I do with this?
Right.
And is it real or isn't it? It really wasn't, I lived his entire life knowing that my son believed that God placed a message in his heart and that his reason for being was to shape that with words. It was not until shortly before his death that I began realizing that this wasn't something my son believed, but that my son really knew God.
It was a mission. It was like a mission given to him.
Yeah. Most people learn about God. My son knew God. And he came to know him in a bigger and bigger way, but it's not that he ever learned about God. He just always knew this God who loved him, who talked to him, who believed in him. And I think it was when he was 13, and he was actually very sad because he said, even the silence of God gives me strength. And he said, God's asking nothing else of me. I've done what I came to do.
Oh.
And that was upsetting to him because he wanted to live longer. And he said, I've completed my mission, and that's sad for me because I love life. I don't want to die. And then since his death, I've had a growing awareness that my son really did have, his spirituality and mortality were more intertwined than I can understand. I'm in awe of it.
Yeah, I want to stop for a moment and talk about how your faith helped you. Because, when you read this story, Jeni, the loss of all of your children, going to the church breadline, essentially, at one point.
Yeah, for many years, yes.
How important was that faith, and how did you continue to hold on through all of this?
Well, there's one good thing about the Catholic faith is the rituals. So in some of the toughest times, we have some rituals and some litanies and prayers and novenas and rosaries, things that just keep you connected at a time that your spirit is just struggling and feels so dark. But I also know, and I learned this, from Maddie, that that hope and what matters most is not something that you measure by money or by a length of life. People think of hope as something that if you try hard enough, if you believe hard enough, it will happen.
Right.
And through Maddie's writings and our conversations, I came to understand that hope is an attitude that moves us through this moment and into the next moment, whatever that is, and that God's with us in every moment. So my faith, my spirituality, there were times I struggled. I never didn't believe. But there were times I wanted God to come and stand there in person and say, this is my will. I'm going to do this. I'm going to save Maddie. I can't say that I went through burying all 4 of my children and then being diagnosed with this and ending up on a ventilator myself. You don't do that with a stiff upper lip and just offer it all up to God. Right. You struggle through it. But I've come to believe fully that God's there with me, and I'm grateful that I was born Christian, and that I am a Christian, because believing in Jesus Christ and the sacraments, the Eucharist, those are strengthening things for me. And I think one of the things that helped me even cope with Maddie's death was the last thing he asked for was the Holy Eucharist. What person thinks of that? What almost 14-year-old wants the Holy Eucharist before he dies?
No, he clearly was between, it was in the vestibule of heaven, if you will, particularly, when you read the things he mentions to you in the book, this awareness of his mortality, his mission in life. There's an exchange you all have during a vacation about what do you want to be when you grow up? And he says, I have to think about that. This summer I have to sort of ponder that.
What it means to be, because he realized that was when he was 10 years old. And up until then, he always knew, I want to be a daddy, I want to be a writer, I want to be this, I want to be a peacemaker, I want to be an ambassador of humanity, and he set all those goals. But when he was 10, he said that he knew from God that he had a limited amount of time, that he was not going to grow up. So whatever it is that he wanted to be, he had to figure out how to be that now, because he wasn't going to have adulthood. And that's what he did for the next 4 years, was live out what he wanted to be.
I love in the book, you say at one point, you always found ways to accommodate his condition. You didn't see this as you didn't internally view it as necessarily an obstacle or a disability.
No, it's a challenge. And yes, it's a disability. You have to call it what it is, but it is what it is.
But you don't stop
It's not
living.
A game stopper. Okay, so this year you've got a breathing machine. What do we need to do to make this breathing machine something that can go out on a beach? Okay, now you can no longer stand up and walk and run. What do we need to do now? Yes, you're jumping hurdles constantly.
And in the early years, we should remember, he almost died when he was born. But he was active. He was competing for his black belts. And And he was good. He won a grand championship, tethered to oxygen, but he was good. So he had this interim group of years. He's very sick when he was young, then kind of leveled off and did well. From the time he was 8 years old on, it was pretty much a slow but steady decline, and then the last 3 years was a rapid downhill. During that time, as I mentioned in the book, I do believe he received the gift of intercession, ironically, from a man who's becoming a saint this week, Andre Bessette. Really?
Yes, Maddie Maddie was not supposed to live past 2001, and he did not die until 2004. And if you look at Maddie's life, Maddie had written most of his poetry prior to that. He had done speeches, everything. But Maddie's window of getting this message of hope and peace out to the world, his life's mission, occurred between August of 2001 and August of 2003. Because, he died. He was very, very sick. There was nothing happened, even though he didn't die for another year. Very little happened during that last year. because he was suffering so much. So he was supposed to die that summer, and he had a relic of Andre Bessette that he touched himself with and prayed for a miracle.
How did he come across that? Did you have a devotion to Bessette?
No, I had never heard of Andre Bessette. Through the Muscular Dystrophy Association, a friend of ours that does fundraising, he's a grocer. He had a friend who did follow Andre Bessette, had a relic, said, I'm giving this to Maddie. Maddie was bleeding from his trachea, his fingers, his lips. They were trying to get him home from the hospital so he could die at home. Nobody even thought he would survive the trip home. Blood just pouring out of him. And he took this relic and touched it to himself and prayed. And he said, you know what? When I die, and I have no fear of being with God, being in heaven. But I feel like I have more to offer. And if that's true, please give my body the strength to finish what I came here to do. The bleeding stopped. The doctors couldn't explain it. In fact, the doctors thought it meant he was about to die. They thought, oh, wow, he's scabbing, he's going to die. They thought it was a scary sign. He didn't bleed for another 18 months. And it was during that 18 months that he was on Oprah. Worked with Jimmy Carter, traveled to different churches and talked, met with school children and geriatric and doctors and nurses. His life's mission was during that little concrete time. And I'm thrilled that Andre Bessette is being canonized.
This week was just canonized, yeah.
Our eyes are for looking at things, but they are also for crying, and we are very happy or very sad. Our ears are for listening, but so are our hearts. Our noses are for smelling food, but also the wind and the grass, and if we try very hard, butterflies. Our hands are for feeling, but also for hugging and touching so gently. Our mouths and tongues are for tasting, but also for saying words like, I love you, and thank you, God, for all these things.
Tell me, in the book you described something that you call thin space.
Yes.
That you and Maddie shared.
Yes.
What is that? Describe it for people.
A Presbyterian minister told me about this. It's that space where most people, many people, believe God exists. But it's kind of like, here's my spirit and here's my mortality. And they're not really intertwined the way Maddie's was. I think Maddie's entire life was thin space. But for me, you know, I know about God and I pray to God, and every once in a while you feel like, oh, wow, that's God, you know. But it's with this glorious sunrise, or you're in a certain prayer place. It's that space, whether it's a physical space or an emotional space, where your spirit and mortality, you don't say, I know God exists, you're with God. And I believe it's from a Celtic tradition. It's something, you know, that there's actually a space where people go, a physical geographical location. But for Maddie and I, we really connected on the edge of a pier on the Outer Banks every summer. We'd go out, and on the last day of our vacation, we'd go out hours before the sun would actually rise, because we wanted to look back and then forward. And we'd sit there talking about everything from what do you want to be when you grow up, to what practical jokes did we play this week that went well, to how is God supporting us in whatever it is we have to deal with in this moment and each next moment. And the last year that we were out there was summer of 2000, where the book opens.
Yeah.
When Maddie came out of a coma in 2001, they had warned me there might be significant brain damage. And so when he opened his eyes, and I'm not knowing, will my son even know who I am, the first thing he said was, don't believe the Christmas trees. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's brain damaged, because it's April, May, and it's like, oh no, he's brain damaged.
What's he talking
and he
about?
said, that's not what heaven's like. That's not what angels look like. He said, angels are beyond anything we could ever imagine and try to create and put on a Christmas tree. He said, it's like going out on a polished pier, and it's every color and no color, and there's no darkness, but you have to go through darkness to get to this ever light. And I always have remembered that he described it as a pier, a polished pier. And that where we sat, that was our thin space, that God was with us, not next to us, but among us, was out on a pier.
He also reflected during that time, the last time you were there, he had this awareness, and this is what I found amazing reading the book, for a boy so young, this awareness of his own mortality and his place in the world. And he told you, I think this will be, I don't have any more holidays, I don't have any more.
Right. Maddie always knew he was a child with a life-threatening condition, that there was a possibility that he would not grow old. His siblings had died. By the time he was 4, I needed a wheelchair. But he lived knowing that. He never talked about my death, my death, my death. It was that summer that, my stomach turned when he said it. But we always talked out on the pier about our coming year. We set the tone for how we're going to go through the next year, and the medical ups and the medical downs, and cliffhangers and celebrations. And he said, this is it. I'll never be on this pier again. And in fact, he lived 4 more years, but was never on the pier again because his health had declined. We could never get back there.
You couldn't go back to the Outer Banks.
We couldn't do that. And what really, really blew me away was his whole, where he said March 30th is a dark day for me. And this is July 16th of the year 2000. And he said March 30th of 2001 is a dark day. And of course that scares me. What does that mean? And in fact, out of the blue, he slipped into a coma on March 30th, 2001, and the doctor said, do you want him anointed before he dies? No one. Well, one doctor said to me, he said, Maddie told me last summer he's going to die on March 30th. If I can get him to midnight, we're going to give him more time. And I knew that God was giving him more time as soon as midnight rolled around. He wasn't out of the woods for weeks and weeks.
Right.
But I just had this sense that God had heard all of his prayers, that there was still something he had to offer.
Earlier in the book you describe how when he was born, the doctor advised you not to bond with the shot.
When he was born, he had CPR right away. Nobody thought he'd survive the night. It was when he had several cardiac arrests in his first month of life. One of them at home where I did CPR on him, which if you do 5 minutes of CPR in a home setting, odds are not stacked in favor of survival. And yet somehow when he got to the hospital, he woke up. And that's a whole nother story where he's at, that was what really scared me. When he was 3, he talked about that cardiac arrest and when he went to heaven. And he was heartbroken. And this is what scared me. He said, I went to heaven. And he said, Katie and Stevie and Jesus were all there, but Jamie wasn't. And he sobbed and cried and said, where is Jamie? Where is Jamie? Jamie belongs in heaven. Why wouldn't God take Jamie to heaven? And I'm like, when did you go to heaven? And he described a porch, and he said, I was on a porch, and you were over me, and you were kissing my mouth. I was doing mouth to mouth.
CPR.
And pressing on my chest, and I was in the light, and I was thrown back down onto the porch. And I was given the choice. Do I want to come back and finish what my mission is? And Jesus threw me back down onto the porch, and I went in my body. But he said, Mommy, I saw Katie and Stevie, and Jamie wasn't there. Jamie was alive. Jamie wasn't dead. And I hadn't ever told Maddie, you don't talk to a 3 or 4-year-old about dates. And I didn't even, how can a 6-week-old remember that he had CPR? And he had never knew that story.
Wow.
But, it was after that cardiac arrest, the doctor said, if he does survive at all, he will probably, there's a little hope that he will ever walk, talk, or think like a normal child. And they didn't say you should, but they said what most parents do in this situation is put their child in an institution, let nature run its course, and not let them be an emotional or financial burden. And I said I bonded with him the day I found out I was pregnant, Christmas Eve, 1989. I bonded. I cried because I didn't want to have a 4th child. after seeing what happened to the first three, he was an unplanned pregnancy, not an accident.
Yeah.
An unplanned but very welcome spirit meant to be.
What does it tell you about the value of every human life? And in a society now that so degrades and belittles people with the least, I mean, God, I'm nearsighted, the hair's falling out, I'm a disaster over here. People have various degrees. Well, look, you're far advanced. I mean, you know, at least you've got the smarts on me here. What does this story tell you, and what is Maddie's message about the value of every human life?
The message is that the value of a life is not measured by heartbeats, but heart songs. And a heart song is your reason for being. And only God knows for sure, and sometimes us, if we're lucky like Maddie, know for sure what our reason for being is. I like to think that my reason for being was to have my 4 children, even though that means I live with the burden of an empty lap. But, and there's nothing heavier than empty lap and empty arms when you've buried your child. But I got to have Katie and Stevie and Jamie and Maddie. I can't imagine not having them as my children. You know, there are children like my son Stevie who lived 6 months. Everybody would look at Maddie's life and say, oh, of course we should have done everything to save him. But you look at Stevie who lived 6 months. You look at Jamie who lived 4 years. 2 of them in a persistent vegetative state, much like Terry Schiavo. And the world would be quick to jump to a conclusion on what is the value of that person's life, what meaning, what quality of life do they have. And I will not deny that my children suffered and I suffered. But I do not question the meaning of those children's lives any more than they question the meaning of my son Maddie's life. And what I can say to people who say, but Maddie did something the first 3 didn't.
Right.
Maddie was who he was because of his 3 siblings. Maddie lived the longest because he was the youngest. Maddie's heart was touched to begin writing poetry in the first place because he grieved the loss of his brother. Maddie realized at a young age how ephemeral, how fragile life is, and that only we can make the choice of how do we reflect the truth of our life. Maybe we do have to stand in line and get a box of food from church. That doesn't mean you're a miserable person. You know, we reflect the truth of our life, and that's our choice. And that was Maddie's life story.
Heart song. I have a song deep in my heart, and only I can hear it. If I close my eyes and sit very still, it is so easy to listen to my song. When my eyes are open and I am so busy and moving and busy, if I take time and listen very hard, I can still hear my heart song. It makes me feel happy, happier than ever, happier than everywhere and everything and everyone in the whole wide world. Happy like thinking about going to heaven when I die. My heart song sounds like this. I love you, how happy you can be, how happy you can make this whole world be. And sometimes it's other tunes and words too, but it always sings the same special feeling to me. It makes me think of Jamie and Katie and Stevie and other wonderful things. This is my special song. But do you know what? All people have a special song inside their hearts. Everyone in the whole wide world has a special heart song. If you believe in magical, musical hearts, and if you believe you can be happy, then you too will hear your song.
My last question, you often talk to Maddie about the choices in his own life. What do his choices have to teach us?
I guess I would say we cannot choose what happens to us. We cannot choose if we give birth to the child that lives 1 second or 1 century. We don't always choose whether we're in a breadline or in Taj Mahal. We don't choose what happens to us. We often don't even choose what happens around us. What we choose is how we reflect the truth of our lives into the world, onto others, into the future. And hope is a choice. peace is a choice because they begin with attitudes, and an attitude is our choice.
Well, thank you for sharing hope and peace and your extraordinary witness with us. You are an amazing witness, not only to the faith, but of a mother and a mother's love. And the story is so moving and touching, and I think an important message that you've carried, Maddie's message and your own, to so many people.
And it's growing in the world today. So many things have grown from his legacy.
Long may it thrive. God love you.
Thank
you for being here. For more on Maddie Stepanek and his amazing life, as well as for information on the Maddie Stepanek King Farm Foundation, visit maddieonline.com. You can also find Jeni Stepanek's book, Messenger, The Legacy of Maddie J.T. Stepanek, and Heart Songs at bookstores everywhere, as well as at maddieonline.com, and you should go out and buy many copies. When we return, we'll discuss the upcoming referendum in Sudan that could threaten the peace agreement in that country and what you can do about it. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay with us.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guests are very well acquainted with the always uncertain peace in Sudan. This January 9th, there will be a referendum to decide whether northern and southern Sudan will secede and form independent nations. There's growing concern over the outcome of that vote. Here to update us on the situation are Catholic Relief Services Sudan advisor Dan Griffin and Auxiliary Bishop of Khartoum, Daniel Adwok. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Excellency, Dan, thanks again.
Thank you.
No, it's a long stretch across the table.
Great.
I won't even reach over there. Tell me about this January 9th referendum. What is the significance of it, and why is it so contested at this point?
Well, we have to remember that 5.5 years ago, a 6-year ceasefire was agreed to that ended Africa's longest-running war. This was a war that's been going on off and on for 45 years, with 2.5 million casualties, the world's largest displaced population anywhere in the world. It is currently the largest humanitarian intervention anywhere in the world. So the stakes are huge. And what we're seeing is now, as you said, we're into the last months of this referendum. What comes next? Will there be this peaceful referendum that allows the birth of a new nation, or will it be a return to a very old war? If this goes badly, if the war is allowed to reignite or return to Sudan, we run the risk of witnessing a humanitarian catastrophe that would make Rwanda look manageable. There are literally millions of lives that hang in the balance of this.
Bishop Adwok, I want to start with you. What is at stake here from your position, and what are the Catholic bishops of Sudan saying? How are they counseling the people to vote in this referendum? Have you taken a position?
We have taken a position, certainly asking the people to recognize the moment that they have to use their reason other than just deciding or being allowed to decide by somebody. We have started this period, and especially with the 101 days of prayer for peace in Sudan. Change your heart, change the world is the title of the process of the team. We are asking them that, first of all, the reason for which the referendum is important is almost the main issue guiding the whole process of the comprehensive peace agreement. 5 years have elapsed since the signing of that agreement, and at the end it was said the people of the South will be allowed to either opt to secede or remain united with the Sudan, with the rest of Sudan. Now, this decision comes at the moment in which the people of southern Sudan do not see any change in the system of government in Khartoum. The process of Islamization still goes on as it is. The wish of the people of the north to Arabize still goes on, while the south, right from 1947, said no, we are Africans, we are Christian, we are partly people who practice traditional religions. We would like to recognize all these values, and even including the Muslims, and we would like to remain as one united country in these diversities. This has been contested. So this is now the time that the South is asked to say its opinion as to, is it opting to secede or remaining united? So I think many in the South are now saying that we have to separate.
Dan, what is the potential fallout here? Should there be a referendum? Should the decision be that there will be separation, that the countries decide to secede? What is it that you and others are fearing? Violence?
Well, the worst-case scenario is a return to violence. Should that referendum be flawed or the results of it be challenged? Should Sudan be allowed to return to violence, or there be repercussions against minority communities that will remain in the north if the country splits? The potential, I think, for a return to violence is very real. Again, congressional testimony by the Director of National Intelligence has indicated, Sudan is where we're most likely to see a mass killing or a genocide again in our future. That opportunity of, again, the returning to war, returning to the violence, not only in the area between where they would split, but what about, will the communities in the South be able to survive? Will they continue to fight over the resources? Will they be allowed to move forward as a free and independent country? The challenges to this are enormous, but the risks are real.
Your Cardinal Bishop, just a week ago, Cardinal Wako, while saying the Mass, celebrating Mass, a would-be assassin came up with a knife to kill him. What is the reason for this? And is this happening in other sectors of Sudanese society where Christians are being targeted?
Well, it's not happening, and the reason certainly will have to be found from the man himself who came up with that knife. But I am pretty sure neither from the police shall we get any tangible information about the motives for his coming up on the stage with a knife during the celebration itself. But in the previous months, in the months around June, July, we received some leaflets, leaflets just left over the street, in which there is a call from a pseudo movement in the country to eliminate senior Christian leaders and Southerners who are in the capital in Khartoum. And the name of the cardinal was among them. Yeah.
So this is a part of a planned attack and has something to do. It is tied in a way to the referendum.
It is tied to the whole process. The whole process, because the referendum is being seen by some elements in the north as an obstacle towards the unity of the country, and at the same time also an impediment on the advancement of the Islamization that would begin from Sudan into the interior of the rest of Africa.
Dan, the South also has enormous natural resources, oil, the water. There's a lot at stake here. So those in the North don't necessarily want to see this happen either, right?
Sure, but this is also not about just a political reality, because the church is not on the side of the North or the side of the South. The church is on the side of the poor and the marginalized. The church will remain on both sides of this conflict. People who dedicate their lives to working among the poor and the marginalized, and agencies like our own who work to serve them, run the risk of running into these political agendas, running into, when we raise our voice or the voice for the voiceless, it becomes a target. The church can become marginalized. viewers of this program will know that for much of the history of Sudan, the communities of faith, this has been one long way of the cross for them. This oppression, this suffering is likely to become far more intense if there's a formal succession in the country, and a very small minority remains in the north.
Now, Catholic Relief Services is spending $4 million on what it calls peace building in the region. Tell us about that. How will this money be used?
Well, we have a full program of about $20 million of doing traditional development, agriculture, water, education, and the programs that we've done for years since we entered Sudan in 1972. This $4 million is a result of looking at the critical consequences to Sudan, what has to happen now. And we said we can't wait. If there are lessons to the Rwandan genocide, it is that we can't wait. We have to work as hard to prevent emergencies as we do to respond to them. So we put $4 million of our private money into urgently trying for emergency preparation, conflict mitigation, skills that work with communities, offer them an alternative vision to this return to war.
How can viewers participate in this 101 days of prayer?
The Catholic Church, our Caritas partners, and certainly the Church in Sudan, are inviting all people of good faith and goodwill to pray for the people of Sudan, to learn what they can about Sudan, to advocate on behalf, to speak out about this crisis, and to support the work of the Church where they can. CRS has launched a website and working with the local church, peaceinsudan.org, that provides the resources, that provides an opportunity for people to join their prayers, literally, with the people of Sudan every day as they commit themselves to these remaining days of this, as we lead up to the referendum.
Bishop, we have heard a lot in the last few years about these militias that have been running through Darfur, in parts of Sudan, terrorizing these villages. Now, the government says they are not responsible for these militias, yet they continue on unchecked. Is that happening still now?
Well, as in the south, we just learned 2 or 3 days ago that the government of southern Sudan has started talking to the militias that are there in the south, and their leaders have gone to Juba to meet with the rest of the government officials. And I think they are beginning to try to work towards unity and focusing certainly at the issue of the referendum, which is coming now in January 2011.
What do you think is going to happen here? Is this the beginning, or do you think we're on the cusp of a period of peace, or are we going to see a return to what we saw 10 years ago?
Well, the reason for which we came around is to prevent any return to war. And that's why we are appealing to the government of the United States, and a week before we were at the UN, that they engage with both the government in Khartoum and the government in Juba in order that they could dialogue on the remaining issues that are needed to be addressed.
And Dan, where is the administration at this point? How is this message being received by the Obama administration and others?
The U.S. administration is engaging in Sudan, I think, at a very high level, very significantly, but perhaps belatedly. If you look at, it was only in the last month that President Obama publicly associated his name with Sudan, and sent, again, more senior diplomatic engagement in Sudan. It's encouraging, but again, this is, I think, why we're here now. The signs aren't good. If you look at troops are moving to the border, armaments have been procured, they aren't good signals. And that's why we're here, asking for your prayers and support for Sudan. As people of faith and people of hope, we hope this goes well, but we have to be prepared should it not go well. But that's what we're asking, again, you and your viewers, for the prayers and support.
In the document that the Sudan Bishops' Conference wrote, they identified and cited the root cause of the conflict in Sudan. And they said one of the major problems was this oppressive regime, one and the other being identity. Tell us about those two causes. I think it's very hard for people to put this in perspective. It's not necessarily a religious conflict, but it is about identity in some ways.
Identity in the Sudan has been described as Islamic an Arab. And this is the identity which is being promoted at this present moment. And therefore, we who are neither Muslims nor Arabs, we say, no, we are also Sudanese. Sudan is known as multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and a plurality of values which should be accepted by all.
Your thoughts on what do you believe the end result will be of this referendum?
I think the struggle will continue, whether this referendum delivers the opportunity for the people of the South to live in their full freedom and dignity or not. They're going to continue with the struggle, perhaps one form or another. If the war takes another generation, if the war takes another, millions of lives of the Sudanese, they will continue. It's too late for the people of Southern Sudan to look at this as just a political process. They see this as about their dignity and about their rights, that you cannot be bargained away or delayed.
Bishop Adwok, Dan Griffin, thank you both for being with us. And I want to share this with our viewers and listeners. If you'd like to find out more about Catholic Relief Service's efforts in Sudan, and they do incredible work, not only in Sudan, all over the world, go to their website, peaceinsudan.org. Peaceinsudan, one word, .org. And remember to keep the bishops and the people of Sudan in your prayers. And on the website, you can find out more about the 101 Days of Prayer, an important initiative and one that we hope you'll embrace and practice. Well, that's all the time we have until next week. You can find updates and the occasional commentary by following me on Twitter at twitter.com/Raymond Arroyo or on my Facebook fan page. And you can always find me at RaymondArroyo.com. The prayers and personal devotions of Mother Angelica and the entire Mother Angelica collection, including my biography of Mother, are available at bookstores everywhere and through the EWTN Religious Catalog. I'm also going to be posting a new initiative I just produced on the Facebook page, so be looking for that. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.